ofertë për Super Duo. Merr pakun Super Duo me këtë super ofertë nga IPCO. Nënshkruaj kontratën 12 muajshe dhe përfitoj zbritje. Nxitoni, oferta është e limituar. IPCO në shtëpi.
Blej tani me Comfort Card dhe paguaj me këste pa interes në post të në LB Bankës. Çka të don zemra? Në LB Banka.
Kur nuk e internet mirë, lajmet e mira të vinë me vonesë. Kur lajmet e mira të vinë me vonesë, dita mundet me shku mbrapsht. E për me shku dita mbar, zgjedh njërën prej pakove të internetit të mobil. Ter yll 900 thurje. IPCO 4G. Me ty kudo.
Shikues të nderuar, përshëndetje, mirë se erdhët në këtë transmetim special në kuadër të turneut të saj në për Ballkan. Sonde kam nderin që si mysafire në studion e radio-televizionit 21 dhe mysafire të këtij emisioni special për një intervistë të prezentoj Drejtoreshën e përgjithshme të Zërit të Amerikës, zonin Amanda Bennett. Ms. Bennett, welcome.
Thank you.
So, you have been touring in Balkans, you visited most of the states. What's the purpose and what are the findings of the tour in general, let's say?
The purpose is Voice of America has been broadcasting in this region for 75 years without interruption, and I'm the first Voice of America director to ever visit this area, and we think a visit like this is really long overdue because we have such close relations with the Balkans and with the stations here that we thought it was really time that a director came here to meet with our affiliates and meet with the region.
And by meeting them and witnessing firsthand the way they operate and who they deal with, if I may put it that way, what do you make of it all? What are your impressions?
Oh, there's so many different impressions. First off, there's such a close connection between Voice of America and almost all the journalists of the region. We have people who were born and raised here. As you know, your own owner was once working with VOA, and the people are very close colleagues. So there's that. There's the very close relationship. Also, I was surprised by, should not have been, by the very high quality of journalists that there are. People are very, very skilled in every country we went to. And then at the same time, there was clearly, it's not any secret, a very difficult journalistic environment that everybody in the Balkans is working with. And I heard over and over again about the challenges people were facing.
And let's say, being a global organization, where would you compare Balkans? I mean, we get Freedom House reports and other international evaluations citing Balkans as partly free environment to work or stuff like that. But having in mind that you do have a global network, how would you characterize or where would you rank Balkans difficulty-wise to do journalism?
I mean, I think it's a pretty difficult place. It's certainly not among the most difficult places. You know that Voice of America broadcasts in North Korea and China and Russia. So there's definitely places that things are much worse. So this is not the most difficult, but like most of the rest of the world, we're finding that some of the pressures are getting tighter rather than, expanding. There was a period of time where we felt like journalistic freedoms were expanding around the world, and now we're getting a feeling that they're contracting, and I certainly felt that here as well.
Okay, you said that you've been broadcasting for 75 years straight. Not a lot of media outlets can brag about those numbers. If I'd ask you what's the, let's say, secret of the longevity and of the success, what the reply would be?
Well, there was different historical periods. We started right after World War II, and we had a very close connection in the post-World War II era. And then there were different historical periods that we went through. And then, there was a time when I think in the United States and around the world, people thought, oh, well, the Cold War is over. We don't need to be in the Balkans anymore. But I think we're starting to realize that all around the world, the kind of journalism we try to do is really important here. So I think partly the secret is that we think of the Balkans as very important, and you're really a crossroad of a lot of very important historical events.
And at the same time, a lot of people, rightly so, look at the VOA as not only an impartial and a very important media outlet, but also as something that's for sure an, let's say, agent, intermediary, something like that, for United States in their particular country. So it would be good if you would just explain the structure, your relations with U.S. government, and your presence all around the world as such.
Yes, our relation with the U.S. government is really, really interesting because we are 100% funded by the U.S. government. All of our funds come from the U.S. government. And we are also, by law, separate from the U.S. government. There's a law that was passed in 1975 that said that VOA must report impartial, independent news to the highest standards of professional journalism. And that's by law. But I think as almost everybody knows, a law is only as good as the people who believe in that law and enforce it. And we are very lucky in the United States to have two things. One is that in Voice of America, our professional journalists take it as their absolute mission to do impartial journalism because they think that's really where our credibility comes from. And then also in the United States, an independent press goes all the way back to our history. And so we have a culture on both sides that stresses that objective, independent journalism is really important. And I think that helps us so that even though we're funded by the US government, we don't see ourselves as putting out messages for the US government, but rather looking independently at the way the US is working and the way different countries are working and trying to be as objective and fact-based as we can.
And speaking of being objective and fact-based, I saw that you are accompanied in your visit in Kosovo with representatives of VOA in Albanian, and it's been, as we said, that it's a desk that functions, and it's a desk that many Albanians, not only from Kosovo, they have something of a, I would even go as far as saying a spiritual connection with the VOA. Did you notice something like that in here? And what was the reaction towards you and then VOA in general by your visit? And let's say, what are the main challenges, I wouldn't use the word obstacles, in Albanian desk, the VOA?
So as far as the spiritual connection, I think that spiritual connection goes both ways. And did I see it? It was very hard not to see it. In Montenegro, we had a journalist that grew up in Montenegro and worked with all the journalists there. Walking down the street with him, it was like everyone in Montenegro was his cousin. And same thing in Sarajevo, a journalist who kept on, she lived and was born there, kept on broadcasting out of Sarajevo during the siege, despite the fact her own father was killed and it was very dangerous there. So she also is very closely connected with the region. And we have two journalists from Albania who were born and raised here. And then, of course, there is our division director, Alej Biberai, and I've been saying, it's like walking down the street with Brad Pitt. You can't take two steps without someone coming up throwing. We've only been here in Pristina for less than 2 hours now, and I've already counted, it was 7 people a few minutes ago, now it's up to 10 people who come up and recognize him and say hello in the street. So I think there's a very close two-way connection.
You'd have difficulty putting hairstyle like Brad Pitt, otherwise he is very famous.
Yes.
He is quite something of a celebrity.
Yeah.
Now, some years ago, I had an interview with an official of Radio Free Europe, and he sort of implied that as long as there's a Free Europe editorial desk for one country or in one language, that means that the US authorities think their presence is needed there, that either journalism standards are not to the highest level, either there's a need for a more objective information and communication, either the democracy level is not that high, or it's a country that is in crisis. Does the same principle apply for the VOA? And can we say that actually we are still in sort of a crisis or transition or whatever, a condition that we need VOA as such?
Honestly, I think that you're seeing around the world that the need for a news organization like VOA is growing everywhere rather than shrinking, because we're seeing, first off, in the Balkan region, you can see that there's economic pressures, there's political pressures, there's social pressures that are growing, not relaxing. And we're also finding, I think, all the way around the world, that media is getting more polarized, so that each news organization speaks not for the whole citizenry, not for the whole country, but for one piece of it. And we think that's very dangerous, and we are very, very committed to trying to, as hard as it is, to reflect all the different issues fairly by looking at them from all sides. So we think, not just in the Balkans, but everywhere, we think this type of journalism is really critical.
So we can count on VOA being long-term here.
We certainly hope so, because we think it's a really important place for us to be. I mean, particularly here, we've got our country has such a close relationship with Kosovo, and we really think that it's important for us to be here.
Because it is said and proved that we are the most pro-American country there is, and as I said, not only the respect, but the connection that people have to VOA is something special. But these challenges that you mentioned in day-to-day operations of the media, these are not only, it's not a phenomenon located only in Balkans, it's worldwide. It's something that I am guessing VOA has also work to do in order to adapt to the new challenges. What do you make of it all? What do you make of the world scene in general?
Well, again, I think that we're seeing that the world scene, I would say virtually everywhere, is getting more difficult. And that the pressures on the media are becoming greater. I mean, you talk about Freedom House, you talk about the various media watchdog groups. I think they all pretty much agree that everything ranging from countries where there's outright attacks on journalists, physical attacks, to places where there's political pressure. I think you see it getting worse everywhere.
And of course, I have to, not only as a VOA director, but also as a journalist for many years and a Pulitzer Prize winner, there's no way of avoiding when we say media in transition. We're talking about internet, we're talking about social media, we're talking about new forms of people expressing themselves, new forms of people finding groups that they would support their opinions. And the perception overall is that the VOA is sort of classical, old school journalism, and news are perceived as such. They do not deviate, they have the highest professional standards, but we're living in a time with not, let's say, the speed or the need to communicate as quickly as possible. There are times when standards are ignored. And would you say that's a challenge for the VOA and the news organizations such as yours?
Well, I think that's part of the challenge in the world, is that people, including journalists, have seen that standards and the speed of communication are in conflict. And that's something that we don't believe. And we think that that's one thing we see respectable, professional journalist organizations starting to come to believe more and more, that speed and electronic transmission and mobile transmission and video journalism and digital journalism and graphical journalism, those are just tools. And unless you have the high standards of classical journalism, the tools are useless. If you move things quickly, but they're wrong, or they're biased, or they make no sense, that's not journalism, that's just stuff. We believe that old-fashioned journalistic values are not at all in conflict with these new technologies. We do think it's harder for us to learn to put those two things together, but we don't think they're in conflict.
And keeping those highest standards that we talk about in all of the languages that the VOA broadcasts, in all the news desks that are out there, and transmitting the same values all over the world, for you as a director, how hard is it, or how does your routine look?
Well, it is very hard, and of course, it would be impossible for any one person to be able to personally hold up the standards of every single thing going out all day. We have 24/7 distribution. We have people putting things out on the web all the time. So what we have to depend on is we have to depend on the journalistic integrity of the people in our organization, and the people who are the leaders, the people who are just editing, the people running the daily news show, and then the leaders of those. So each level, we have to depend on the passion, commitment, and the integrity of the people there, because otherwise, one person up at the top, I can't see this much of it.
And when mentioning the modern trends or challenges that the media in general faces, I have to ask about the, let's say, relationship that the US president, namely, but US politics lately has been developing with media. And when I say that, I mean the fake news accusations and fake news as a trend in general, and everything that's been going on. It's the perception is that it's getting difficult for people to know what's real and what's fake out there.
Well, and this is one thing where I think that journalists, we need to take control of things, because I've said over and over again that I really dislike the term fake news, because the word fake and news, those two things don't go together. If it's fake, it's not news. And so I don't think that we should accept the fact that there even is such a thing as fake news. There's things that are not true and not fact-based and not fair and maybe biased, but those aren't news the way we would like to practice them. And so I think that there are forces out there that want to confuse us and want to persuade us that there is no such thing as truth. There is no such thing as a fact. And I don't believe that. I believe that there are facts, there is truth, and there is research that you can do, and that it isn't true that anything that you say can be true or can be realistic. That's just not true.
And yes, in the same time, there are, let's say, 5 to 10 or more headlines about the same event, and not everyone in 2017 has the time to read 10 articles in order to get, let's say, his version or to get the truth from all the angles. And would you say that's happening, that media outlets are covering it only partially and we get a blurry picture of a lot of events?
Well, and I think part of the reason is right now, because of the speed, there's lots of organizations that really are only giving part of the truth. But I do think that it's important that there be single news organizations that do credible work, that when you look at this, you say, because I've looked at the work of this organization over and over and over again, I know that if they say this, they have a good reason for it, because they've done the research, they've talked to this person, they've heard not only this statement here, but they've also checked to see this statement here, that there are credible news organizations, and that I think because of all this noise, people want something that they can look at and say, okay, here's all the noise, but I'm going to go and see a source that I think is credible.
We're talking about 75 years of the VOA, and judging by what you say, it's something that as a project, as a media outlet, will continue to be there and will continue to provide highest standard journalism, which leads me to the question of the challenges for the future. Do you think there's a transformation needed? Do you think you need to keep up with this sort of work? And let's say, how do you imagine VOA in 5 to 10 years with all the technology and with all the challenges that we talked about so far?
Well, I think that going forward, of course, we have great challenges to get our technology up forward, but those are challenges that are faced by every news organization on the planet, and we're finding them very exciting, because the technology that you talked about that causes so many things to be coming on like a tsunami of news also is very powerful. And we're finding that the more we learn about the technologies, the more powerful we can get. We just had, a wonderful training in Sarajevo where one of our VOA journalists trained a bunch of young journalists. And, nowadays, this, a young journalist or anybody can, with a cell phone, can go out and do a full newscast in a way that nobody could do it in the past. So the technology causes stresses. It also gives us a lot of opportunities.
And does that mean that we will see a new face of it, or we will just have, let's say, just VOA updated, if I may use that term?
Well, a new face of it in that I think that we are all being challenged to make our news more relevant, more interesting, more personal, to do better storytelling and not just and so to do all kinds of things better and more interesting, because there's so many challenges for people's attention. You want them to be interesting and engaging. That's a challenge to improve that. But in terms of, are we going to deviate from our traditional values? No, I think it's the other way around. I think the fact that media is polarizing like this clears this giant space for us to be who we are.
And you're supposed to attend also a debate in Pristina and meet other officials. What's the expectation? What's the topic that's going to be discussed, and to what comes down the whole visit, if I may put it that way?
Well, I'm going to be meeting with some prominent people here, journalists and other people, and I'm really interested in asking them what they see as their situation, and if there's a difficult and complicated media situation, I don't have answers to it. What pathways do they see to improve their own situations? Because that's really interesting to us. How do we see a pathway to make this better? We see these things pressuring, going down, but we want to be forces to help in some way. So I want to know how.
Yeah, help will be needed, because we talked so much about the difficulties that we face every day, and yes, I can probably say that your help is one of those that we will count on. First of all, thank you very much for the time and for the interview, and wish you a pleasant stay in Kosovo.
Thank you so much.
Shkues të nderuar, bisedua me zonën Amanda Bennett, drejtoreshë përgjithshme të Zërit të Amerikës, për disa prej specifikave që Zëri i Amerikës e bëjnë të veçantë për mbresat e saj në vizitën në Kosovë dhe në Ballkan në përgjithsisht, ku në fakt edhe njerë u konstatua dhe u vërtetua nga dora e parë se popullata shqiptare në Kosovë këtu, por në Ballkan përgjithsisht njerëzit kanë lidhje të veçantë me Zërin e Amerikës si medium e shohin, si një prej dritarëve për të mësuar të vërtetën për shumë çështje të cilat ata i preokupojnë, dhe Zëri i Amerikës si tillë, si organizatë që aplikon standardet më të larta të gazetarisë ka rol të veçantë, posaçërisht tani në kohën kur përparimi teknologjik ka mundësuar që jo domosdoshmërisht mediat i përmbahen standardeve më të larta të gazetarisë edhe parimeve të zanatit të cilin ne e bëjmë. Kështu që ka nevojë gjithnjë për gazetari objektive dhe gazetari të mirë, pavarësisht nëse nuk është domosdoshmërisht më e shpejta në botë. Këtu do ta përfundojmë këtë intervistë tonën speciale, duke falendëruar edhe një herë zonin Bennett për kohën dhe intervistën. Miropafshim në transmetime tjera.